As the ADC walked off, he said to the brigade commander, "Don't forget, you owe me a relief in place." Now, what does that mean? That means that that particular ADC at that particular moment is more concerned about going through a series of activities rather than getting it right, even if it meant foregoing an activity. You follow me?
Right.
So the next afternoon at 5 o'clock, the guy called me up and I said, "Did you win or lose?" And he said, "I won." I said, "How many toes did you take to the field?" He said, "Took the same 130 toes." And I said, "How many did you fire?" He said, "We fired 112. And I said, "Did you get kills with toes?" "Yeah." He said, "We got a lot of kills with the toes." His toes weren't in the fight. Now,
Yeah, right.
here's a case where going through the motions, doing an attack, doing a defense, doing a relief in place, doing a meeting engagement, all these things that you have to do as drills, if you don't stop, I mean, the lesson in all that is if you don't stop and get any of them right, and you don't get your weapons in the fray, then the people lose confidence in their weapons. Don't count on them, and won't make them when they first go to combat. And they'll get their ass blown off if they fight a big enemy. And they won't if they fight the Iraqis or something, but they would if they fight somebody else. So there's a case where confidence says, from a senior guy, it's okay to screw it up. We have trust and confidence in you, but go do it again until you get it right. And you'll save lives doing that. Now, that breeds confidence. I don't know who that battalion commander is. I know somebody who knows who that battalion commander is, but I don't know who that battalion commander is. I'll bet you that forever he would get his toes in the fight, because he now feels comfortable that it is a killing weapon system if it can be brought to bear. So it's back to, you asked about drills and confidence and all that, and I just think that that's where senior commanders need to apply their wisdom, which, one, encourages people that it's okay to make a mistake. We're not flogging you for it. We're not writing you up as being a lackluster lout for getting whipped in this particular exercise. What we'd like for you to do is go through some little routine that analyzes this is the typical thing of the after-action review is analyzes why it is you didn't fight well, and then do it again so that you feel comfortable about getting your weapons in the fight.
Is that what that battalion commander did, you suppose?
I beg your pardon?
I was trying to imagine what the difference between day one and day two in that battalion was. What, if he didn't know how to get them in on Wednesday, into the fight on Wednesday, what was the difference when he did it on Thursday and he did get them into the fight?
Well, he concentrated on
getting them in a position where they could engage.
Get them in a position where the troops can engage them, and he probably put some smoke down on the company commander for the ITVs. And he got an Echo company that had ITVs in it. He got it put in a position where he could fight. Most of his equipment was ITVs.
Right.
He didn't have any Bradleys, so it was a APC operation at that particular time in the 4th Mech Division. So all I'm saying to you is setting standards for people. It's okay.
Rather than just running through.
Yeah, just don't go through the exercise so you can get checked off that you ran these 5 different or 4 different exercises, which they say you got to do. Be confident at something and say, geez, I need more time so I can get confident or competent at something else.
Yeah.
So the 82nd, just go back and reprise that for a moment. The 82nd was a joyful place to work. Very high regard for the division commander by everybody, from the troops up to the leadership. Jim Vaught was another one of the ADCs. So several of the ADCs achieved lieutenant general rank. One did a 4-star rank. A couple achieved major general rank. All these guys are turning over underneath Croson. And it's just a very comfortable place to work. It had terrific subordinates, had a terrific boss, and he had a lot of bullets to shoot, and people wanted to train, so he trained.
That does sound like a prescription for success
You
and
bet.
also for contentment
You bet.
among everybody, satisfaction. So what happened when you left the 82nd? Is that when you went back?
Well, that's when I got that lovely set of orders at that time to Fort Sill, Oklahoma. So I left the 82nd, spent about a month on holiday, and then I went out there to be the deputy for combat developments at Fort Sill. I didn't know anything about combat developments. I mean, you're talking about a guy fish out of water now. I knew nothing. Now, the ADC out there, the assistant commandant out there, was a guy named Vernon Lewis. He'd been my predecessor in the
And he'd been in the 11th too, hadn't he?
yeah, he'd been in the 11th. He'd been my predecessor in the 82nd, and now he was the assistant commandant at Fort Sill. And the commander at Fort Sill was Major General David Ott, who's a distinguished artillery officer and later would become a corps commander in Germany. So I was given this mission of being the combat developer in the schoolhouse. I didn't know anything about combat developments.
What does
So-
combat development mean? Tactics or equipment or both?
No, it's equipment. Doctrine and equipment. But not the teaching side of the schoolhouse. Principally in looking at doctrinal use of artillery, and then what weapon systems or ancillary artillery systems need to be brought in order to do the job better. So I got into that, and I was there about 3 months. Came out on a brigadier general's list. And
My God, did you have 3 years in grade yet?
I mean,
You didn't even have 3 years in grade, did you?
2.
Yes, 2.
And I got a call the day I came out on the list, and it was from General Bill Depew. He was now the commander of TRADOC. He'd been the commander of TRADOC for 2 years. And he said, "You are going to be assigned as the Deputy Chief of Staff for Resource Management." A billet that I had helped him create when TRADOC was created. It took the comptroller functions, the personnel functions, force management functions, put them all in one shop called the Resource Manager. And that's over all the Army now, but at that time we were the only command that had that. And I said, "When do I report?" He said, "You report as soon as you can clear a post." He said, "There's only one thing I want you to do." And I said, "What is that?" He said, "I want you to be a brigadier general when you get here." I said, "Well, I got no control over that. I mean, you want me to get promoted out here?" He said, "I don't care. You can get the toll taker on the Mississippi River Bridge to promote you. I don't care how you get promoted." But he said, "When you get here, you be a brigadier general when you arrive on post." So a day or so later, there came through instructions to promote me. Whether I was frocked or not, I don't recall. Maybe it was frocked. So I got on I was promoted by General Ott and my brother. My brother at that time was a major general. So I got promoted and headed east and became the resource manager at TRADOC. Took over from a major general named McGifford, John McGifford, who later would be the director of the Army staff and then retired as the 4th Army commander at Fort Sam Houston. So I became the resource management guy for General Pugh, and then I was working, General Gorman was the trainer. Many of these guys, Woodmansee, Burdyshaw, others had been promoted. Burdyshaw had been promoted. I think Woodmansee would be promoted the next year or whatever. And Burdyshaw was in the combat developments. A guy named Stan McClellan was the personnel guy. Went to work for Depew at headquarters trade op. Terrific period of service because Paul Gorman was just coming in with the RTEP business and the SQT, skill qualification test, which had to do with many things I've just talked about, is what are the skills you're supposed to have.
Yeah, the standards Army-wide by grade, wasn't it?
That's right. Which a lot of people don't like. See, there's a euphemism that goes around the Army, said we trained to standard, and then you say, we trained to what standard? And they say, well, trained to standard. You got to keep picking at that. What is standard? So Gorman and Depew wanted to have everybody trained to a specific standard. And I heartily ratify it. I think that's the way you do it. So skill qualification test, in my view, is right on. Other people in the Army don't like that, but I did.
They want more local autonomy?
Local authority about that. You get local authority about that, you find some people won't do it because they haven't got moral backbone to go do it. They don't have the moral backbone to somebody's. Let me tell you what I learned in the recruiting command. I'll tell you that one more time. If you don't set the standard, somebody else will set the standard below you, and it may not be congruent with what you had in mind. So this is the thing you say, we want all infantrymen to have certain standards, all artillerymen have certain standards, all armor guys have certain standards. Now if they all have certain standards, then it doesn't make any difference where you go in the world or what unit you get assigned to. We know that you have a basic set of standards. A lot of people don't like that because they say, well, geez, you're telling people what to do. And you say, that's right, we are. I mean, this is not a everybody do their own thing operation. This got war fighting connotations to it. So of all the branches of service, the two that have most nearly the kinds of standards you want are the artillery and the armor. I mean, there is a way to load the weapon in a tank, just like there is in a howitzer. It's just a standard drill. You want everybody to be damn good at the standard drill, and we can figure out what else you got to be good at. Well, at any rate, those were exciting years. I spent 75 to 77 down there, and I moved up to be the program analysis officer at the Department of the Army. But that's when the first glimmers of the National Training Center came along. Gorman and I went out to take a look at Fort Irwin, California, which was in a National Guard post. Quite different now than it was then. So that was quite a formative period in my life. Now, it's easy working for Depew because I've already worked for him for 3 years, so there was none of this getting used to the boss game. Depew had, he's done an oral history. You can take a look at that sometime if you want to figure out what he was doing there. And I won't recount what he's doing, but one of the things he did was we travel with what I'd call a traveling squad. It's one of the techniques I learned from him that I would later employ both as the chief of recruiting and as the commander of Trade Dock commander in Panama. Which meant essentially, which we all know is true, the commander The command is wherever the commander is. So Depew would take Gorman, Burdishaw, and Thurman, and we go somewhere. And I wasn't in the training business. I wasn't directly in the combat development business, but the osmosis that went on there with the other two guys who were very good at their business, Gorman at training and Burdishaw in combat developments, rubbed off. And in my case, the comptroller could, comptroller or resource manager could go anywhere with Depew. And having said that, I recall going to Fort Sill, Oklahoma one day, for example, and Depew said to the then commandant, General Ott, who I respected highly, he said he had a scheme up his sleeve. This is at the time that the then Chief of Staff, General Abrams, had asked his subordinate four-star generals to cough up spaces so that he could create 16 divisions instead of 13 in the third. So Depew was on a trail of how to cough up spaces. So he said to David Ott, he said, right now we're sending recruits through Fort Leonard Wood or Fort Dix, and then we send them here to Fort Sill for advanced training. Yeah, that's right. Said, suppose I gave them to you from day one, and you came here and you had them for the total period of time. Couldn't you start training them on something in artillery on day one, like, you could show them what an artillery projectile is going to be, or, yeah, that's great. You mean I'd get them for the whole period of basic and advanced training? Yeah, that's right. I said, God, that's a great idea. He said, I bet you if you took that basic training, that advanced training, you could probably squeeze out some time. Yeah, boy, I could probably do that. So why don't you take a look at that and give me let me know in about a week what you think you can do. So I came back in about a week and said, geez, we might be able to squeeze out 2 weeks of time out of that. Depew, going back on the airplane, had already told me, he said, take 3 weeks out of that 16, out of that, it used to be 8 and 8, with a week in transit to get from one place to another. So 17 weeks. He said, take it down to 13 weeks. To me, going back on the airplane. And I said, okay. He said, then figure for me the number of trainees that we could reduce and the number of trainors we could reduce. All this stuff I'd done before.
Right. This is the interaction of
in the PA&E job I'd had as the programmer. You follow me? It's right. right back at working for Stanley Resort 4 years earlier, 3 years earlier. 1970 to this is 1975, so it's 5 years earlier, but same conditions pertain. So we calculated that, and then he said to General Abrams, if you will let me do one station training at Fort Knox already was doing that. If you let me do that at Fort Benning and at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and a couple of other schools, I'll bet you I'll save you X number. He turned to me and I gave him the calculations. He will save 5,000 people, which is half of one of these new bobtail divisions. He said, now the condition is you got to give me barracks money so I can put up barracks down there. So his grasp of what the art of the possible was, and then a guy like me, I was the calculator in the back room. But the point I want to make is between Depew and Gorman and Bill Burdishaw and combat developments, and I'm sort of the sweep-up guy here in terms of providing the resources for these things, able to make some major shifts in terms of how to run a business enterprise about that. So that was quite a learning opportunity. And of course, then I got fully into combat development, so I learned a hell of a lot in the 2 years I was down there about combat developments, because I sat in on every meeting that was done in combat development. So I got to know the people in combat developments, what they're able to do in various activities, both in the Army Material Command as well as in the TRADOC itself. I think duty at TRADOC, this was what I call my third tour in TRADOC now, because I was in TRADOC when I was at Fort Solo, or when I was at Fort Bliss, Texas. Then I went back as Fort Sill for a brief period as a combat developer. Then I come in this job at headquarters TRADOC. So by the time I'm at TRADOC headquarters, it's my fourth or fifth tour. So getting to know the combat development business and how the role of the Army Materiel Command gave me a great insight into how to be an effective programmer when I got back up to be the Major General in charge of program analysis and evaluation. And it also gave me a great insight in how to be a better vice once I became the vice chief. The other thing that I would say to you is understanding what the school system does for the Army. Doctrine, leader development, equipment development, requirements, the equipment requirements, and the like. Those things ought to be understood by every Army officer that arrives at the top of the pile. And therefore, one of the things, if I had anything to do about it, and I was the Chief of Staff of the Army, every hotshot general I thought I had, I'd make him cycle a tour in the TRADOC. It's not to say there aren't other important jobs to be done, but there is a learning curve about that. That if you can serve a tour as a brigadier general or a colonel or as a branch school commander at Leavenworth in one of the jobs there, in the combat developments business or whatever, there's just a wealth of information that comes through you about how the Army is run that's very difficult to get in one of the operating commands. And so my own view would be that those would be highly prized, highly sought after jobs because I'd have all my hotshots go through them. If you look around the Army at this moment, 1993, December 93, Sullivan served in TRADOC, Benny P. served in TRADOC, a newly announced four-star McCaffrey served in TRADOC.
What's McCaffrey going to take over?
Jowen did not, to my knowledge. Maddox did. Downing did. Jimmy Ross, I can't recall. I think not. But essentially, Reimer did not. Don't believe he had a tour. But sort of 3/4 of the four-star generals in the Army today have served in TRADOC. I don't think that's luck of the draw. I think that is calculatedly done. So there's a great wealth of information about the bedrock undergirding of the Army. Those things that served the U.S. Army well between World War I and World War II are located in the training command. So that was important to me to go back there and do that particular task. There were other jobs. I mean, it cut me out of being an ADC. So that's how I spent 2 years as a brigadier general.
What's the real point of ADCs? Is it training to be a division commander?
Yeah, I think that the business of being an assistant division commander gives you, there's a great leap between being a brigade commander and being a division commander.
Yes.
And having the opportunity to be an assistant division commander gives you a raised perspective that takes you away from what I call the nitty-gritty of running a brigade and gives you a better perspective about how to employ the various elements of a division or those things that can be appended to a division in a reinforcing role that you perhaps didn't get when you were a brigade commander. So I think it is a learning opportunity, and I'm not denigrating that. I'm just sorry I didn't have that opportunity. It would have served me better had I had one. But If I were king, what I would do is you would not be a assistant division commander but 1 year. Because I'd want to cycle as many people as I could through that particular billet of being an assistant division commander. I'd run it on the model of the Crozon division. It's an 06, 08 division.
Right,
And these guys are cycling through for training about the operations of divisions and how to operate, so that you can get a chance to observe a good division commander operating a division, and you are able to parlay that then if you were elected to be a division commander, or whether or not you go off and do other work, but you fully understand the needs of a division, and oh, by the way, in case of mobilization, you'd be available to be a division commander.
And you put the other year in trade op or someplace like that.
Mm-hmm. Or a staff job in Washington, joint staff or elsewhere. Now, once you get locked into joint staff, you're in there for a couple of years.
Yes, that's a new requirement.
Always new requirements.
Never enough time.
It's always progress to add new requirements.
One of the things I kept hearing when I was collecting data in the late 80s was gotta have more time for lieutenants to be lieutenants. They aren't, even the lieutenants were saying, I wish I had a year and a half or 2 years with one platoon, my first platoon particularly, before I get shuffled to another platoon or a staff job. There's always, it's a rushed experience forming an Army officer.
Yeah, there's a lot to get done in 30 years. And then inside of that 30 years, there ought to be some payoff time.
Like the war powder?
No, I'm talking about, there are people who rush through billets, but they don't become competent at anything.
I think I misunderstand.
And so there's,
sort of
when I was the vice chief, I used to speak to all the new brigadier generals. And the discussion went something like this. You have been selected because of your future service, not your past service. So it's what you're going to give us now that you were selected for. And therefore, I want you to make sure that you notify the General Officer Management Office if you have any impediments in service. In other words, if there's some place in the world you can't go because you have family problems or you have children that need special care or whatever it may be, let us know that right now. Because now you're going to pay the Army based upon the investment we've made in you, and we're going to figure out the jobs that you can help us out with based upon your competency. And you see, a lot of people don't like that because they want to select their own jobs. Now, if you take me as a brigadier general, if you knew I was competent at resource management, I mean, I'd been doing that kind of work in the Pentagon for 3 years, and he wasn't hiring me to be an artillery commander, he's hiring me to be a resource guy. And I was pretty competent at that. So then I come in and be the PA&E 2 years after that, so this is now my 7th year. After I get through with 2 years there, I spent 7 years in resource management. I'm pretty confident at that.
Payback time.
Payback time. I mean, you say, well, geez, in my case, suddenly I went to the recruiting command, didn't have a chance to, quote, be a division commander. I felt badly about that because that's what I really wanted to do. But, you know, the Army had better ideas in mind for what they wanted me to do. So when you get to be a general officer, you're doing what the Army wants you to do, not necessarily what you'd like to do. Because it's time to pay off.
Right, is an inversion of what many people perceive as.
Well, a lot of people feel that it's their business to tell the Army what they want to do. Goes the other way around.
If ever there was an expert in telling the Army what he wants to do, it's Max Thurman. He started as
But
a
not when I was a
second
general.
lieutenant. Not when you were a general.
No. Payoff time. Do what the bosses tell me to do. Always do it. Never was AWOL.
Who was it? Was it Scheinmeier who made you recruiting command commander?
Yeah.
That interview.
Yep.
What am I, you must be talking to somebody else, not me.
Yeah, I was sure he was talking to somebody else, not me, but it turned out he wasn't. He's talking to me. So I went out there and did it. Had fun while I was doing it.
You've managed to do that pretty much throughout, haven't you? I haven't heard anything about the time you were miserable.
Always had fun. Because every job I've had has been a learning experience, either by having good bosses to learn from, or the sheer nature of the work to be done was inherently interesting. I think you have to find that. You know, some people are given responsibilities that they don't crave, and therefore they don't look for something to get interested in. Then they become storekeepers and mind the inbox or the outbox, but they're not really genuinely into it, and they don't feel good about what they're doing.
Yes. There's a lot of that around, not just in the Army.
Probably.
Could you describe the difference between the command climate General Rosen created and the command climate that General Norris created? It sounds like they're...
Colonel Norris?
Colonel Norris, yeah, they're fairly similar. Except there seems to be a joyfulness about being in the 82nd that wasn't there and
I think in the main, they had a lot of similarity in terms of letting people below them run their business. I think the difference between the two of them would one is now Major General and he's had 2 divisions, and the other had 1 brigade command, brigade level command, group level command. And just has to do with the relative difference in position. I mean, one guy's just been around longer and done a lot, seen a lot and done a lot more than the other man.
a higher level of confidence than General Rosen.
I don't think you can compare. I really don't believe you can compare a division commander's domain and that of a brigade commander's domain. The nature of the duties are different.
Okay.
And the nature of the duties are so different that notwithstanding what style you have, I think they transcend your style. So, I mean, both of those guys I got along with very well. Never was accosted by Colonel Norris, who's a perfectly fine chap. And just different from Croson. I mean, what was not a micromanager. I mean,
Yeah, both of them seem to let you do your job.
do your thing
Another interesting thing.
and
is-
report back.
Yeah, we were talking earlier today about, in connection with tour lengths in combat, the importance of commanders' learning curves and how it could be dangerous if there's a frequent change of commander. But then you did very well in both of your combat commands. Well, the 82nd were not in combat, but it was, you were part of the fire brigade. In spite of the fact, as you described many times to me, the limited amount of contact with the force that you had, both in those 2 commands and in the experience of the 11th Division. It worked for you. I mean, it was all right for you. You were an effective battalion commander, an effective brigade commander, without much else in the way of troop contact. So your other argument holds water too, and but they do seem to be kind of contradictory.
I think that the 82nd Airborne departed, for example, is an enormously, was and still is an enormously competent outfit, well-trained outfit, because they have these almost inexhaustible resources to train. And it attracts, in the main, high quality, very high quality people. If you think about it for a moment, and you had fought Desert Shield, Desert Storm for, not for 100 hours, but you had fought it for
9 months.
a year, then tell me about the level of competency of the next group of company or battery commanders and the next group of battalion commanders and the next group of brigade commanders. Now, at the moment, we have the National Training Center. But if I had to go to a conscription and I had to set up those training periods like we did with the National Guard by sending them to the National Training Center, the Georgia Brigade that went before they were certified to go overseas, then you could envision that I would have to send my replacement units and officers through a similar experience at the National Training Center. If you go back and read some of the work like Certain Victory, it was the Army's history of Persian Gulf War, you find comments by the company commanders out there that this wasn't the first attack I'd been into, this is the 21st or the 19th or the 10th or the 9th. I've been through this thing 9 times at the National Training Center. I'm just trying to suggest to you that even in our own Army today, trying to find the next group of commanders that have gone through that with their battalions, like our current battalion commanders have gone through, then you got to create the circumstance in which they can take a battalion through the National Training Center. Now that sounds a little bit convoluted, but if I laid that out on a resource timeline for you, you understand that to replace a battalion commander of a tank battalion who had been to the NTC, I got to take the same battalion commander and take him to the NTC and let him be a battalion commander at the NTC. Otherwise, I'm sending a rookie in to take an experienced guy's place. You follow me?
Yes.
So it may be better to fleet up the battalion exec or battalion 3, if he indeed is competent, and make him the battalion commander and stay longer in country. I'm just saying, I don't think we've worked all that out in our heads about a protracted conflict. You follow me?
Right.
And as long as you can overpower them, overwhelm them, get it done in 100 hours or 5 weeks or whatever the hell it is, then you got no problem with keeping people over there. I think you may say to me, well, there won't be any circumstance in which we'll get embroiled in another Vietnam, so your question is moot. I say, yeah, it may be moot, but it almost became non-moot in Persian Gulf because we were there. We had to make a decision about where we were going to stick with our people and rotate them because we weren't sure when the attack was going to take place. So these are matters to be studied, laid down in what I would call an operations research mode. Now, a lot of people don't like to hear that, but it's a matter of laying the calculus down, much like we tried to do in a cohort. You can't just say we ought to do cohort and go do cohort. You got to sort of look at what are its effects on things. What are the resources that are going to be required to do that? So if you believe that rotating commanders every 6 months is good, then you don't have to worry about it. My own view is, I think it's bad. I think Korea or Vietnam proved it's bad.
Yes.
Now you may say, well, what is the max length a guy can be a battalion commander? I'd say, no, go take a look at World War II and tell me what it is. I mean, if you're a researcher, you could go and tell me that. And say the average lifespan of a battalion commander in combat in World War II was X amount of months, but he may have had Y amount of months as in combat as a 3 or a brigade S3 or an XO or wherever it may be. So you begin to get some yardsticks as about the relevant training of people that happened in World War II. Now, one reason that Pew was adamant about trying to create the National Training Center was that he had been in a unit that had was poorly trained and had an officer cadre that wasn't very well trained, so that's one reason he wanted to get on with getting a National Training Center, and I think our officers are probably the best trained in the world. But the question is, who the next guy is going to come in? Well, if you don't have a big force, let's say you get down to 10 divisions, all 10 divisions are created, and over there, how many of your National Guard battalion commanders have been through the NTC? And the answer is not very many. So that's the, I mean, you asked me about my own career. I think my own career would have been enhanced by having more troop units, no doubt about it. Been a better commander. I mean, maybe I was satisfactory, but maybe I could have been excellent. Better, you know, more innovative. So, you know, I think, see, again, I think that you have to set up some systems, and that's the reason we've set up the system we have, which is for the average guy. And there'll be some people outside that, but clearly, as I've already stated, you know, in current parlance, I would be a non-entity without having had sufficient amount of battalion time.
My impression was that even at the time that you were in the Army, you had to climb uphill quite a ways in order to get the assignments that you wanted, and constantly being turned down as being, I'd like to hear the story about how you got the job with the Pew, how you managed to overcome the obstacles. They said, well, you aren't qualified, you haven't been in Navy PG school.
Well, no, I hadn't been to grad school.
Oh, is that the only one?
Yeah, I hadn't been to graduate school, and I told then Colonel Bill Richardson, I said, well, don't you still run papers around here? I mean, don't you have to get actions done in the Pentagon? I said, I'm probably the best action officer in the Pentagon. I've only been there for 7 months as a desk work guy, but I knew how to run papers in the Pentagon. So, Richardson knew who I was. I mean, he'd seen it.
You'd been invited there, hadn't you, something like that?
I beg your pardon?
Weren't you assigned there? And then they said, you're not qualified to be here?
No, I'd gone up to apply for a job
I see.
when I was still at the War College, because I wanted to come back and work in that shop. I mean, I'd seen the shop at work when I was a lieutenant colonel on the Army staff in Des Moines, but I wanted to get in that particular shop if they had a vacancy. So Richardson was the XO, was the hiring and firing guy at that time. So, you know, he said, well, you don't have an advanced degree. We hire advanced degree guys. And I said, well, you know me from West Point, and I know how to run papers there in the Pentagon, so I can do that. So if you need anybody to run papers, I'm your guy. So I don't know how that got decided. I mean, don't know.
Richardson must have made it like a recommendation.
Well, either that or he just hired me. I don't know. Maybe he just said, we're going to hire Thurman. I know him, and that's the end of it. I just don't recall that. I mean, he never confided to me about that. Pretty soon I had orders to go to work there.
Some people made some pretty good judgments on taking a chance on you, and certainly paid off for them time after time. sense something.
Rule 1, when you're given a job, try to do it the very best you can. That's rule 1. Any job. It's like being the billeting officer at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. It's not a very glamorous job. Just try to do the best you can. And apply yourself. In other words, I think you overcome a lot problem about if you have a reasonable demeanor with your peers and your bosses, and you're willing to interact with them. Now sometimes you get rebuffed, and they say, buzz off, we're not interested in that. That's fine, but that doesn't stop you from coming back the next day on a different track with a different subject, or that subject on a different sales pitch. And I think most everybody is looking for somebody who can get something done. And if you're then willing to work in our system, you can get reasonable chits for working. If you work, you'll do okay. Simple as that. See, I think you have to enter into it on the grounds that you asked me to serve and do this line of work. I will give you the best shot I can give it. If you don't like it, get yourself another guy. Now, it's easy for a bachelor to say that.
That's true, it is easier.
So that gives you very high confidence that there's nothing too hard for getting done. I mean, just tell me what it is you want to get done, go get it done. And on the other hand, it says you're very comfortable. If this isn't meeting the mark and you turn out that you're not gifted at this particular work and somebody wants to dump you, they dump you.
Yeah, the courage to resign is...
No, not resign. That's not the point. The courage is don't be hard pressed if, don't get disconsolate if somebody says, you're not cut out for this kind of work. In the main, if you work hard and you have a good demeanor about that and you get the work done, people will have a good feeling about what you're trying to do. They may overlook some of your faults because, one, you are willing to go to work, and two, you are of happy demeanor and you don't sulk, and you get to, in the main, you got to get the work done though. Being in the Army is about getting work done. That's what it's about. Whatever job it is, we're asking you to do work. And we'd like for you to do it at ever progressing levels so that you can be more of value to the enterprise. But the principle is the same as in civilian life. If you go to work in a firm in civilian life or you work for yourself, then the notion is get work done. Not stroke people. It's nice if you can stroke them and all that, but we're not in the namby-pamby business. We're in the business of getting work done. Because in our case, in the Army, you get people killed. And that's the reason I'm not a behavioral scientist. You see, behavioral scientists will say the way you do this is you stroke people, make them feel good, and they go do work. And I say, no, you set standards, tell them what it is you want them to achieve. When they achieve the standards you set, meet the goals you set, then you stroke them, and then they'll feel good. Motivation, you don't stand up and motivate people. You say, let's go motivate. That's not the way you do it. Set standards, ask for people to do things for you. They go in, or for the benefit of the unit or whatever, they go and do that, you clap them on the back, give them a piece of ribbon, hold them up in esteem in front of their fellows, and suddenly they have motivation. They feel good. You don't fire people. I mean, I fired a couple, but not many. I mean, I got a hell of a reputation for firing people. I've fired a total of 3 people.
Do in the 82nd?
All 3 of them in the 82nd. Fired 2 and relieved 1, moved him to another job because he was cursing the troops.
Oh, that's right,
couldn't stand that. I mean, it's not that I don't use profanity, I do, but you can't stand in front of a formation and curse. He got tired. So there's a burnout. You got to recognize when people burn out.
Did he ever go back to being a first sergeant?
Yeah. Good man, terrific guy, good family. He got reacquainted with his family after that. See, in the case of the battery commander, I told you he slept. In the intervening week, I was out in the field. I relieved him in the field because he couldn't organize his battery in a parachute assault. Now I want to tell you, if you're a battery commander in the artillery and you can't organize your battery for a parachute assault and shoot bullets when you get on the ground, you got no business being a battery commander. He had been an aviator, and he was a CH-47 driver and ended up being a battery commander. He was ill-equipped for that, but nonetheless, he was there when I got there, and there you were. So I go out there, and I relieve him, and I told him to go back into garrison, and I would see him on Friday morning. This was about a Tuesday morning. So I got back in and out of the field after 3 days in the field, and he came in to see me. I said, how you feel? He said, well, I want to tell you, it's the first 3 nights sleep I've gotten in 6 months. And I said to him, you know, this is not your business. Maybe flying CH-47 is your business, but this is not your business. You're not comfortable with it. Quote, he wasn't doing the job. Now here's a case where this wasn't round 1. This was round 2 with this individual, and so it was better for everybody that he be gone, because we had to go to combat, and somebody thought we'd get killed.
Yeah, that was a crazy system that went on, I don't know for how many, maybe 20 years, where Army aviators were also expected to be branch competent.
Not possible.
It's impossible.
Rare kind of guy can do both. I mean, really rare.
Yeah, I think that's to be all.
I mean,